over the past 2 years, we've been working on this particular topic. I'll mention the full title once, and after that, I'll just refer to it as SpACE-DT. So it's the Spatiotemporal Aircraft Corrosion and Environmental Digital Twin. So Joelle is the PhD candidate that's been working in our department on this particular topic. And within the development work here, she's been very expertly supported by Patrick Taylor and Cyrus Gao. So our thanks to these guys for all the work that they've done to support us. So without further ado, a little bit of background. As you may have inferred from the name SpACE-DT and specifically the occurrence of the term corrosion within all of that, we are addressing a specific physical problem that we don't like in aircraft, which is corrosion. Corrosion happens fairly frequently. It's an age-dependent physical phenomenon, especially with the type of routes that aircraft fly and the type of utilization that they get. It inevitably becomes a problem. The only real response that the industry has to this point is reactive. So corrosion occurs in aircraft. It might be after a few years, might be after 20 years, but it happens. Reactively inspecting for that and then addressing that when it occurs. However, on the input side, there are pretty good predictive models out there that can be used to predict corrosion. What's the missing link? We don't know what aircraft actually encounter. So we know what kind of routes they fly, but the exact environmental conditions that they encounter during their flights are pretty much a question mark, even at the large passenger transport aircraft level. We know what they fly, but the specific environmental conditions and the parameters that then subsequently drive corrosion, we can't really track that. So within our project, we are looking at corrosion, but we specifically look at a sort of smaller scale occurrence, if you will, namely the general aviation market. So there's these smaller aircraft, and we are lucky here at RMIT. We've got about 20 of those aircraft because at the Aviation Academy, we train our own pilots. So we've got the actual hardware, so the physical part of a digital twin ready and good to go. And that physical part of the equation is well positioned within our operations to generate the kind of data that we need to feed into a digital twin. I'll come back to that later. Finally, why is corrosion a problem? Well, you see some of the safety aspects that may occur. So if you do have corrosion-induced failures, you get things like the nicknamed flying convertible, which was about 40 years ago, the Aloha Airlines accident. But pretty much, like I said, currently we've got a reactive response towards corrosion prevention and mitigation and management. And it costs about 20% of the overall maintenance budget for any airline throughout the world. So it's a substantial amount of money. We're talking millions, if not billions here. So it's something that airlines and maintenance repair and overhaul companies are very interested in addressing. So in this specific project, we took a look at, is it possible to fill some of the gaps? And can we work towards a unified airframe digital twin where we bring together that input data in a virtual representation, the input data coming from the actual physical assets, bring that together within a virtual representation, virtual model, and then have a simulation environment where we can, on the basis of assumptions regarding future utilization, generate predictions. So what kind of corrosion will we see? And then can we proactively control and manage that instead of just waiting for something to happen and periodically have somebody inspect the aircraft and most of the time not even finding something. So it's all just wasted effort. So in terms of research question, specifically what we're trying to do here is to bring in environmental and operational parameters. Like I said, that's the primary missing link. So we fly our aircraft, we know pretty much what happens to individual aircraft, but in terms of environmental parameters in particular, which are very much driving corrosion, we don't really know. We can't track that. So in terms of our methodology, there's a couple of elements there, but obviously we built a digital representation of our flying assets. So you'll see that later on. It's 2D, it's fairly straightforward. But then subsequently we wanted to include obviously predictive capability. So we leveraged existing prediction models and we improved them as well, but it's a separate part of Joelle's PhD. Developing visualization for the outputs and then have a feedback mechanism and a loop into the end users. So in order to prevent this from becoming a digital shadow, as the previous presenter mentioned, a specific part is also including those end users so that we have that feedback from the digital model, the simulation environment, predictions, going to somebody who will actually say, right, we've got this physical asset, we'll start using it in a different way, or we'll start interacting with it in a different way. So I'll briefly skip through that with an eye on the time. This was part one of the project. This was last year. So Joel presented this in a similar setting last year. So at that point in time, this was a proof of concept, which was a locally hosted visualization tool. We basically visualized what was going on with specific aircraft, with specific flights, on specific dates and times. So basically that capability was to generate an overview of the environmental exposure that a specific aircraft would encounter during a specific time frame, which would be defined by the end user. And then we'd couple that into a predictive model, but at that stage, that predictive model was pretty static, I would say. I won't go into the details, but it didn't really represent the full range of what you could do predictively with the type of information that you were getting. So in the second round of what we were doing, and I'll briefly skip through that, we tried to get much closer to something that an end user would actually use and appreciate. But before I get to that, and I've got a video there so I can show some of that actually being demoed. Before I get to that, these kind of parameters are the things that we are pulling from the aircraft. So it's pretty simple. It's latitude, longitude information, speed information, as well as air temperatures, and that kind of information feeds into the type of models, physics-based models that we use to predict corrosion. So this was the old iteration, and now in the video I'll show you, and hopefully it runs. This is always the hairy part of any presentation. Show you what we've been up to over the last year. So there's a nice bit of music with that. I've shut down the sound so I can actually talk a little bit as to what's going on, because there's a lot happening here. So basically this first part is an extension on what you saw in the first iteration. So we've now got the capability to fully visualize all the aircraft flights that we've got in our databases, that we've got captured historically, and actually represent the individual flight phases for these aircraft trajectories. That's important to us because corrosion acts differently as to which flight phase you're in, basically. We can also visualize time series of the driving parameters of corrosion in that, and then subsequently those time series would be inputted into our predictive models, which we'll come to in a second. For the end users, it's also quite important to be able to visualize exactly at which points in time something has happened to their aircraft. So we've got visualization capabilities to really show what was going down at any specific day, at any specific route that was being operated. Now the next part is then to bring in a predictive element. So on the basis of the information across a specific time frame that's then fed into the models, we're able to generate predictive curves. And you'll see that those curves are actually, they look pretty flat, right? So there's not much going on. The key thing to realize there, this is very much a cumulative process. So this is for a single flight. You see a little bit of variation and that's driven by different exposures basically. But then if you integrate it over time, integrate it over hundreds, if not thousands of flights, you'll start to see very strong differences, which we'll get to in a few seconds. When you start forecasting. And the forecasting is dependent, of course, on assumptions on how an aircraft will be used in the future, what kind of flights it will actually do. But when you do that, you start being able to generate predictions with associated confidence intervals, and you can tie that in with the current maintenance planning approach, where people basically say, every 100 hours, we take the aircraft out of service, we'll look at what happened, and that's it. But with your predictions, you can actually be quite a bit more proactive in saying, right, there's something going on right now, we've only flown 50 hours, but we need to actually start looking at this part of the aircraft. Or we're pretty sure nothing's going on, let's not do that maintenance intervention, let's wait until the 200-hour mark. So that drives some of that sort of economic decision, or the economic output and the planning decision making. So with respect to version 1, what's changed? First of all, it's now cloud hosted on Amazon Web Services, very beneficial from a computational point of view, and from an end user perspective, it's much more efficient. So an improvement of over 60 times in terms of speed, which in human terms means you can actually use this now and not spend, minutes waiting for outcomes to come. You spend 1 second or so waiting for something to be predicted, which is very important if you're an end user. You don't want to be stuck waiting in that loop. The architecture is modular, so we can extend it, which is quite important to us, and we can also scale it, which is also quite important to us. I won't go into the details here, but we've got extended plans for what we're doing here with this application. And we've built in, with the help of the team, obviously, built in some security provisions, which is going to be important down the line as well. Some of the functionality that I'm mentioning here is something that you've seen already in the video, so I won't dwell on it too long. But basically, it's really enabling that end user capability to interact with and to forecast and to start predicting and using this stuff. And on the forecasting, we've built in an integrated weather forecasting API, so we get the right predictions and the right reflection of the type of conditions that aircraft go through. So in terms of the architecture, again, I won't go into the details, but it's just a snapshot of how everything is brought together. So some database layers, some modeling and execution layers, and then in the end, we end up with a browser-based capability where an end user can easily access all of this and do their stuff. I might just skip through that, but maybe some of you, maybe all of you are familiar with this, but just a periodic table, if you will, of digital twin capabilities. We're about the halfway mark there. It's not our goal to go to 100% or anything, but just to visualize a little bit on some of the things that we're trying, that we are touching on in the DT that we're building. In the end, and that's going to be probably my final remark, which is just on time, hopefully. We are very much in this loop. This is the process in which we envision this to be working. We've covered most of the steps. One of the things that we want to do more on, we've done the first steps here. Like I said, end user involvement is important, but we want to do more on that. So we want to really see if we can run this in parallel with the current approach that people are using in practice to maintain the Aviation Academy fleet, and then see if that would materially inform their decision making and adjust their planning. So we've got what actually happens, plus what would you do if you've got that information, what is the impact, what is the value of what we're delivering here with this kind of tools. And a final note on that is that Joelle is not just a PhD student, she also works for Textron Aviation, which is basically the Airbus of the general aviation market, if you will. She will be returning there after her PhD. Unfortunately, I would like to retain her for academia, but we'll see how that goes. But we're very much looking into working with them to bring this to a larger sort of market. All right, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.